All right, we can go ahead and kick it off. Today is November 6th, 2024. This is the meeting of the Kubernetes, the Container Storage Interface Community. On the agenda today, we have one item. If anybody else has anything they want to add, feel free to add to the agenda doc. The link is in your calendar invite. With that, I think we can jump into the first item from Jan. Create volume capacity range interpretation. Jan, you want to talk through this?
Okay, thanks. So in CSI, in create volume, the container orchestrator passes a capacity range, how big the volume it wants, and it has minimum and maximum size. What Kubernetes does, it puts the minimum size and it leaves the maximum as 0. And the different CSI drivers interpret this very differently. Most of them actually round the number to the highest, to the smallest volume they can provision with that capacity. For example, they round it up to gigabyte or any other limit they have. But some of them don't even try to round it and return error. So this gives application developers headaches because they don't know what to put into persistent volume claim size. What is the right size that the storage backend would accept? And so what's the recommendation here from the CSI spec perspective?
I would say that for those CSI drivers that could return a larger volume that's within the specified size, understanding that 0 maximum is interpreted as infinity according to the spec, that's not spec compliant. Like if you can create a 1 gig volume and someone asks for a 900 meg volume and you say error, that's just a driver not working. Like we should have a test maybe that validates this as part of the CSI conformance suite. Because I think the spec, I don't have the spec in front of me, but I remembered reading over this over and over again when I was writing CSI drivers. It's very clear that if you can return a volume that fits within the specified size, like you should do that, and you should only return an error if there is no volume that fits within the size range that you can create. And you're correct that Kubernetes never puts a cap on; it only puts a floor on. So you can always round up. It's always safe to do when you're dealing with Kubernetes as a client. I'm kind of surprised. Like, are these drivers returning errors ones that are in wide use? Are they ones that are common, or is this some new drivers that are?
It depends. I think not so many. So we should fix the drivers then. Okay.
I mean, I think that the language in the spec is very clear and very flexible.
I think it's very flexible. It sounds very flexible to me. Like the CSI driver can return anything.
Well, anything that fits in the size range, and Kubernetes only ever sets the floor, which feels like the right thing to do because there's lots of cases where you would have to round up at least a little bit. So you need to give the drivers some flexibility. So a range is way better than a specific number.
Okay. So we should have definitely a test for that and maybe emphasize it somehow because it's not obvious.
I mean, I don't know. It was obvious to me reading the spec and writing a driver. Can we just go file bugs against all the drivers that are not doing the right thing? And
sure, we can.
Say the spec says you should round up if you can.
Then there are CSI drivers that if you ask for 1 gigabyte, you get 1 terabyte.
That's legal. Yes,
yeah, I know legal. It's
legal. It's weird. It's weird, but it's legal.
Yeah.
But is it like, is the driver non-compliant if 1 GB or 100 MB is asked and it has to provision a 1 terabyte volume? Because it's very expensive. It's for CSI driver or in certain CI environment where like I think GCP PD file store is one of the drivers where it upscales to a pretty large size actually. So
Yeah, so the CSI spec is agnostic about cost and quotas and things like that. Like we just don't care, right? We say you specify a minimum size and a maximum size, and if the maximum is 0, that means infinity, which means yeah, you can return whatever. Maybe the thing that would be good to do is to enhance Kubernetes to have a way to put a cap on to say I would like a volume that's at least 1 gigabyte, but no more than 100 gigabytes or something like that, so that we could then Kubernetes would have a way to tell the CSI driver don't go crazy and give me something ridiculous. But we don't have anything like that on the Kubernetes side.
So basically, we are saying that any driver that returns an error on provisioning because of the minimum size requirement not being enough, like, is basically non-compliant.
Only if it could have returned a larger size volume.
Yeah.
And like there was space, and like if you run out of space, you're always allowed to say error, or if someone specifies both a minimum and a maximum, and there's no volume that fits in that range that you can create, you can return an error. But rounding up is extremely common and expected.
Yeah. So the currently like the wording of capacity range error reads indicates that the capacity range is not allowed by the plugin. For example, when trying to create a volume smaller than the source snapshot, or the plugin does not support creating volumes larger than the source snapshot or source volume. So
if you're cloning a volume and you like the original volume is exactly 1 gigabyte and you ask for a clone that's 2 gigabytes, the driver can say, sorry, I don't know how to do that because I can only clone things that are the same size.
Right. Yeah.
But if you're asking for an empty volume that's 2 gigabytes, like there's no reason to say no to that request. Unless you don't have 2 gigabytes.
It will be tricky to implement as like sanity test or something, because what will be the size chosen in that case? Like we can run a sanity test that everybody should be able to provision 1 gigabyte volume at least. But is that?
What we should do is pick sizes that are like weird, non-evenly divisible numbers that are near 1 gigabyte. So like maybe some prime number of bytes less than a gigabyte, and expect to get something a little bigger than that. I mean, basically what you want to do is verify the drivers know how to round up a little bit, and that they're not trying to create something of exactly the size that you asked for, because the CSI spec is very clear that it's a minimum and you can round up. And I think a gigabyte is a pretty common size that everyone more or less supports. I remember EMC had one that had to be multiples of 8 gigs or something. So it might round it up to 8 gigs, but that's still not ridiculously large.
Oh, well, I think GCP file store has, I think, 0.5 terabyte or 1 terabyte is the minimum. AWS has 4 gigabytes for some volume types. It has 128 gigabytes for other volume types. It's very variable.
But still, I mean, if we make a test that tries to create, slightly less than 1 gig and it gets rounded up to 500 gigs, that's fine, right? It's just it's expensive to run that test. But that's the problem of the driver maintainer.
Yeah, that's fine. All right then. And by writing a CSI conformance suite test, what conformance are we talking about? About the one in Kubernetes, the external Kubernetes?
CSI Sanity is where all of our tests are. for CSI drivers.
Not so many people run CSI Sanity.
Well, I mean, it's all we have as a community.
Yeah,
When
CSI.
CSI when storage vendors come and want to write a CSI driver and say, how do I test it? We direct them to CSI Sanity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is there any appetite for doing something on the Kubernetes side to allow specifying a max? Or is that not very valuable?
I don't know.
Because that's a part of the CSI spec which basically doesn't get exercised ever, and there could be a lot of bugs, right? Drivers might misbehave if you specified something other than 0 as the maximum.
We don't have API for that in Kubernetes to specify the maximum size.
Yeah.
It would need to be something in storage class, like don't over provision too much. But that would be a parameter in create volume.
Yeah. I was gonna say individual CSI drivers can have proprietary configuration options that cap the size of the volume that they'll legally return.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also fine, right? As long as it's high enough that the sanity test can pass. If they never want to create a volume larger than 100 gigs, they don't have to. They can just return an error.
Yep.
So is there any chance we can like get a list of the CSI drivers that don't conform, or do we not want to name them here?
No, it's EBS. EBS rounds up to 1 gigabyte, but as I said, different volume types have different minimal sizes, and they don't run all of them up. So if you ask for IO2, I believe, where the minimum is 4 gigabytes, it will fail.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a bug in their driver.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be hard for them to fix either.
Yeah, sure. Like it is manageable. But we were thinking to add some tests into Kubernetes actually to exercise this.
Will Kubernetes allow like a PDC that's like some prime number of bytes? It's not a multiple of power of 2.
You can. It's an integer, so you can put any integer you want into the PVC capacity.
Well, it's an integer with units field, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, does the units processing cause it to convert it to a floating point and round and convert it back to an integer or anything like that?
No, you can put integer there. You can put integer.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like conclusion is to add a CSI sanity test to validate the drivers are able to round up. Is that the main test we want?
I mean, I don't even think that's essential. The essential thing is to file bugs against the drivers we know aren't spec compliant. But then, yeah, having a test would be nice to prevent others from overlooking that requirement. Because it's the kind of thing where, it's easy not to think about it when you're writing a new driver.
I will try to find the AWS issue.
So this will be CSS sanity test or a part of the Kubernetes CSI test suite. And because not all drivers integrate or run with sanity tests, although they should.
Yeah, I think the expectation is that all drivers should be running the CSI sanity test, but not all drivers are expected to run the Kubernetes test. So I think the sanity test would make more sense here, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's just
I
that
would add it to
practice it is
both.
it's exact opposite.
I link the AWS issue. We call it a feature.
Okay, I think we have conclusion on this. So file bugs against non-compliant drivers, add a CSI sanity test to validate drivers are able to round up. Who wants to take the AI on this one?
I might try. Well, I will not do it, but I will find somebody here
Okay,
and do it.
sounds good. Thank you, Jan. Any other topics folks want to discuss today?
Xing was looking for a release of the CSI spec. Have we kicked that off?
Yeah, we discussed this at the last Kubernetes meeting. I think what we were proposing was let's cut a release the week after KubeCon, so in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that works.
So you mean do you do the RC and the voting both after the KubeCon, or the RC before
Correct.
and then voting after?
Both after.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool. Anything else, folks? All right. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
I think you can go ahead
you.
and end the recording.
Yeah. Stop. Okay. See. Stop.